Hey guys. Okay, so earlier last week, Andrew Cowan from White Alderley reached out to see whether we would be interested in doing a case study on this little girl right here. My initial response was, yeah, I'd love to, but I don't think you're going to like the advice I have to give. I mean, let's be real, this one doesn't have any development potential. He actually surprised me. He turned around and said, that is exactly what I want to hear, because I think this house would be perfect for a family who doesn't want units popping up around them. So in today's video, we're going to do a case study on this property. I'm going to talk you through a desktop assessment from my perspective, from a town planner's perspective, showing you what I look at and what I come up with when I look at properties. So if that sounds like something that interests you, stick around. Okay, so now that we've made it back to the office, I should probably set the scene for you guys, give you guys a little bit of context as to what I'm about to show you. What I'm about to show you is what we like to refer to as a Charlie assessment. See, probably about 1 to 2 years ago, B and I were really struggling with an influx of inquiries. As a result, I hate to admit it, but I was shortcutting corners or cutting corners and I was making mistakes. It was not pretty, so something had to change. What we decided to do was to create an automated site assessment tool. This thing is absolutely beautiful, so beautiful. Essentially, the way it works is you basically open up a desktop icon. You then type in the site address to that desktop icon. Then just like magic, a series of different tabs opens up on the screen. I think we're currently up to about 19 tabs or something like that. It does change on a weekly basis as I decide to throw extra things in there or take things out that I think are no longer relevant. Anyway, within each one of those tabs, it opens up a different site, I guess you'd say. So it can range from the Brisbane City Council's interactive mapping program through to the state government easement program, through to Corley Explorer, everything and anything. It then searches for the subject site within each one of those websites. Then what it does is it basically extracts the relevant information from each tab. So it might extract the zoning or it might extract the site area, all that. Then what it does is it essentially goes through and takes screenshots of the relevant information. So it might be images, zoning maps, photos, things like that. What it then does is it populates all of that information into a Word document. Better still, it uses certain combinations of answers to populate certain answer responses. So we might sit here and go, hey, if you have this zone and this neighbourhood planning combination, you need to populate this answer option into the Word document. So the Word document essentially ends up becoming a super concise, I guess you'd say, speedy, human error-free summary of everything we need to know about that property. I then get that summary, and what I do is I quickly review it and provide the client with feedback. So what we're going to do today is talk you through the Charlie assessment for this Gordon Park property. Let's do this. Okay, so what you're seeing here is the covering email that I receive when a Charlie assessment is completed. So it's essentially a super short snapshot of the Charlie assessment, so that it sort of sets the scene for me before I open up the document and go forward. So the things I'm taking note of here, firstly, it's a large lot, which means it's not going to be subject to assessment against council's small lot building envelope requirements. If you saw the video that we did a few weeks ago, you'll understand what that means. Now, next thing I'm noticing is it's a pre-1947 house. Already alarm bells are going in my mind. I'm thinking, oh, does that mean it's going to be protected? Next minute, I see the character residential zone. Okay, so one thing you need to know is that the character residential zone always goes hand in hand with the traditional building character overlay, which sure enough we then see in the following dot point. Now, the pre-1947 house and the traditional building character overlay, those two things in combination equals protection. So it means the house cannot be demolished and you're going to be restricted in terms of the partial demolition work you can do. Next thing I'm seeing is the Lutwyche Road Corridor Neighbourhood Plan. I know that's a pretty innocuous neighbourhood plan. There's a couple little locations within that neighbourhood plan that do have additional requirements, but it's mainly around that commercial sort of strip and some of the higher density areas. Really, if you're talking sort of the typical, typical residential areas, you basically can ignore that neighbourhood plan. Now, the rest of the stuff there is pretty stock standard. We've got a link to the street view, which I can click on later. So let's open up the document. Okay, so here we have a Charlie assessment. Again, we're seeing, like we saw in the covering email, it's a large lot. Great. I'm now noticing we've got 2 allotments. That I'll come back to a little bit later on. The other thing I'm looking at here is, okay, I'm not seeing any large vegetation, so no mature trees, so it's not ringing any NAL or natural assets local laws, aka protected vegetation alarm bells. If you want to know more about what I'm talking about there, probably about a month or 2 ago, we did a video on NAL. Go back and check that out. Okay, so then we continue to scroll down. What I'm seeing here now is the 2012 and the 1946 aerial. These 2 photos are what we use to determine whether a house, in the first instance, is pre or post 1946 construction. So what I'm doing here is looking for roof forms. So I'm seeing like this roof form here is clearly that sort of, what are you going to call it, like a beigey coloured roof form. And I'm seeing across the road, nope, they aren't there in the 2012. So you can see clearly that site there has been cleared to make way for what is now currently a church. This building here, that's still present in the 1946 aerial photo. We've got a row. It's a pretty developed area actually looking at it now. Oh, I wonder what that is. That's an unusual thing. I wonder if it's like a horse track. No, it's not a horse track. Curiosity's got me now. Okay, so anyway, back on track. What I'm noticing is we've got the existing house there, and then sure enough, we've got the existing house there. What I'm looking at is the shapes or the shadow lines on the roof form, just to confirm. So what I'm seeing is we've got the ridge line going backwards there, then we're coming up to a peak from all corners, and then we're going backwards again there. And likewise, if we come up to this photo here, you've got the numbering that's sort of covering it a little bit. If we're a little bit uncertain, we could turn off that numbering system within Council's interactive mapping just to get a clearer view of the roof form. But I can tell you now, it's going to have a roof line going back there, the angles going up to the peak and then going back there. So we can see the similar sort of shape, shadow lines, all of that sort of stuff as what we can see down here. Therefore, I'm confident that the house was built prior to 1947. Now, let's keep going down. We're seeing the contours. I'm seeing a bit of a node up the nodule. What do you want to call that? Like a high point ridge? No, let's just call it a high point for now. So we've got the high point there and we can see it's sort of tracing down there, down that direction there, and same thing back in that direction. Nothing I'm really taking from this. If we were looking at the development options for the property, totally different story. I'd be analysing the contours to look at stormwater, all that sort of stuff. But when we're looking at houses, yeah, doesn't really mean much. Okay, so we're coming down here. What I'm noticing is we've got access to a 1936 aerial photo, 1946 aerial photo. We've already seen the Brisbane City Council 1946 one up higher, but this site gives us access to that photo again. And then we've got a 1949 aerial photo. Now, I will warn you, sometimes don't get too excited when you see those numbers pop up, because sometimes those aerial photos aren't crystal clear and they don't necessarily load properly. So yeah, you'd hope to find all three images, but you may not get them all. So that's interesting to go if you're trying to work out exactly when the house is built. So we can obviously see in the 1946 aerial photo it's there, but the next thing I'd be doing is clicking on the 1936 aerial photo and seeing if it was present in 1936. Now, actually, I might comment on the dating stuff a little bit further when we get down to the street view image. So hold that thought for a moment. Now, what I'm noticing down here is zoning. What I'm seeing is we're located in CR1 Character Residential Heartland. Now, why is that good? If you're looking for development options, it's not good. But if you're looking for a nice, beautiful house, it's going to be surrounded by nice, beautiful houses into the future. So you want an area that's not going to have a high number of units or subdivisions and things like that going in. This is what you want. So this is exactly what I looked for when I was recently purchasing a property. I didn't want units popping up around me. I'm a sucker for character houses. I wanted to be surrounded by old traditional character houses. And if I see that pink sort of colour, and if I see that the property I'm interested in is smack bang in the middle of that pink colour, oh, it's exactly what I'm looking for. On a wider scale, what I'm seeing here is up towards the top corner, we've got a bit of low density residential, which is essentially detached houses, but on medium to large size blocks, so 400 sort of square metre plus blocks. You can't do units or townhouses in that zone. So again, you're going to get that housey sort of feel, but you're going to have less of the traditional pre-1947 houses. So it's more of the more modern housing stock, whereas this central sort of area here, we're looking at more traditional housing stock. Then if you come over here, we're starting to see that salmon-y sort of low to medium density residential zone. That is where you're going to see units in the future in those small sort of lot sizes. So as a guide, you're looking at potentially as low as 180 square metre lots, depending on the subcategory within that zone, in LMR3, and 2 to 3 story units, again, depending on the exact zone, etc., etc. Just as a side note, we've got that church across the road, which is on the yellow community facilities type zoning, and then we've got some park over here, the green. That's pretty much all I'm gaining from there. So yeah, the big takeaway is the fact that the zoning tells you what council intends to see in that area going forward, and therefore it gives you reassurance as to what you're going to be surrounded by. And like I said, in this instance, if you're looking for a cute character house, and if you want to remain surrounded by cute character houses on medium to large blocks, this is exactly what you want, character residential one. Actually, another side note I'll just make. Character residential too is very similar in the respect that council wants to have the pre-1947 houses preserved. However, it is sort of a stepping stone between, like I said, that salmony sort of low to medium density residential zone and the character residential 1 zone, in the respect that you have to preserve the houses, but you can do units and infill development around them. So those areas, yes, you're going to get the cutesy factor, but you're not going to necessarily avoid the units and the smaller block sizes going into the future. Okay, let's scroll down. Overlays. Good old overlays. Okay, so what I'm seeing here, airport environs overlay, not relevant to houses, house extensions, all of that sort of stuff. That overlay essentially is there to protect the ongoing function of our airport and our airplanes and all that sort of stuff. So it's only really relevant if you're planning to do something that's a high-rise structure, or if you're planning to do something that has open waste areas like a dump or something like that, that's likely to attract birds, because obviously birds and planes don't go well together. We did do a video on the airport environs overlay. Oh, it was one of our first videos actually, so that's like a year and a half ago now. But if you want to know more, go back and check that out. Now, community purposes overlay. This is actually a new one. It was only introduced, if I have to guess, I'm going to say 6 months ago or so now. So its purpose essentially is to nominate and specify blocks or spaces around the city that council wants developed into things like community parklands and that sort of stuff. So it's extremely unlikely that you will ever have a site that, like this overlay comes up on every property, but when you actually look in the mapping associated with that overlay, it's extremely rare, or it would be extremely rare to find a property that was actually affected by it. Now, critical infrastructure movement network overlay. The pure purpose of that overlay is to protect the ongoing function of our emergency services and that sort of stuff in a natural disaster. Again, we did another video towards, I'm going to guess, start of last year, maybe. Go back and have a look at that if you want more information. Then we've got the dwelling house character overlay, not to be confused with the traditional building character overlay. That overlay essentially limits you to a maximum height of 2 stories and 9.5 metres in height. If it was a small lot, it would also then trigger the assessment of all of the small lot building envelope requirements. Streetscape hierarchy overlay is there to purely preserve or allow for the future installation of street trees. It gives council the ability to take road windings if you're doing high developments like units, subdivisions. Totally not relevant to houses, you can totally ignore it. Traditional building character overlay, yeah, that's a bit of a kicker one. Okay, so the purpose of that overlay, like I suggested in the beginning, is to, number one, protect the pre-1947 dwellings. So to essentially prohibit you, well, prohibit's a bit of a strong word, prevent, restrict, whatever word you want to use, you from fully demolishing the houses. Now, the second kicker, or the second requirement that comes with the traditional building character overlay, it allows council to enforce character requirements. So basically, when you're extending the house to the side or extending the house to the front, etc., you need to make sure you're using traditional built forms, so pitched roof forms, front verandas, all that sort of stuff, and traditional materials, so tin and timber type materials. So basically, it's there essentially to make sure that any new work you do is in keeping with the character of the area. So council doesn't want suddenly all of these brick modern additions to these old character houses, because it's not sympathetic to and respectful of the character in those areas. Okay, let's continue. Now here we're seeing the building, whatever that building was in the pre-1946 aerial photo, or I should say 1946 aerial photo, it's actually heritage listed. And as a result, all the blocks surrounding it are marked as heritage adjoining. Not relevant to our site, but interesting to know that you've got that heritage sort of value across the road. Okay, road hierarchy, we can see it's a neighbourhood road, which is a quiet sort of neighbourhoodish suburban type road. Suburban is a poor choice of word because that's actually a higher category, but it's what everyday people would refer to as a neighbourhood or suburban road. Now, we saw previously, we've got the traditional building character overlay. And what I'm seeing again, which matches up with the character residential zoning we saw earlier, I'm seeing we are in traditional building character heartland. However, the church and the heritage building across the road aren't protected under the same measures. Okay, we're scrolling down. Neighbourhood plan, I already covered that off at the beginning. Now, street view. Okay, so there's a few different things I'm looking at here. Number one, let's go back to dating. We've worked out by this point that it was built prior to 1947. I would then click on that 1936 aerial, let me get it right, 1936 aerial photo, just to see if it was present in the 1936 aerial photo. Let's assume it was. At this point, I'm starting to think, oh, that roof form's giving me some pre-1911 vibes. Yeah, it's looking like it could have been built before 1911. If you don't know what I'm talking about there, we did a video about a month ago on our socials. Go back and have a look at that. That gives you a lot more information in this topic. So at this point, I'm thinking, okay, we want to check whether it is pre-1911 or not, because that's going to give us information or guidance as to how much external demolition work you can do. Now, at the moment, we actually have Archie, who's doing some work experience with us, doing a whole dating exercise. So I've given him a case study and sent him off to try and work out the age of this house. He's actually, hopefully, fingers crossed, going to do some videos for us in the future, which help talk you through how to date your own house. So what you can do is go visit like the Brisbane City Council archives, the State Library, to look at electoral records, postal records, all that sort of stuff, to work out exactly when the house was built. In this instance, I do know from watching the real estate advert that it actually was built in 1924, I think I heard. So we don't need to worry. In this particular instance, it's not pre-1911, but you would normally go through that whole dating exercise just to work out whether it is or isn't pre-1911, because like I said, that gives you insight into how much demolition work you could do in the future. Okay, so we're scrolling down. Now, here I'm seeing absolutely no blue, which is beautiful, or blue on the image, I should say. That means it doesn't have any flooding constraints, or it's not mapped as or identified as being subject to flooding, which is great. Okay, we're scrolling down. Okay, so right now I'm seeing there's a bit of a history in the street. So what I'd potentially be doing is going into each one of those applications and getting a feel for what's sort of been proposed in the area. Maybe have a look at what the neighbours have done, if there's any applications over the neighbouring properties. Gives you insight into what you can expect to happen in your area in the future. We talked earlier about the zoning. You can expect 450 square metre minimum front lots, 600 square metre minimum rear lots, no units, no townhouses, all that sort of stuff. But this sort of takes you to that finer grained level. So you go in a bit deeper and look at exactly what someone's proposing in terms of a renovation extension to the house. Okay, let's go down almost to the end. Oh wait, I've just realised I've got something. I got too carried away in the whole dating, the pre-1911 thing. Let's go back a step. I need to also tell you what else I'm looking at when I actually see this street view image. So the first thing I'm looking at is, okay, are there any street trees? So are there any trees that are positioned between the front boundary and the curb? Those street trees are protected. Council is super protective over those things these days. So if I was looking at that street view image and I was seeing a heap of street trees, that would sort of be an alarm bell to me to go, oh, okay, this could affect or restrict the future access opportunities. So if you were potentially going to say, I want to relocate the driveway from one side of the property to the other side, and there was a street tree in the way, yeah, that could cause you some issues. You may not be able to relocate that driveway. You may have to work with the existing driveway. In this instance, though, I'm looking at it nice and clear. Thinking along the same lines, what I'm also looking at is, okay, is there any power poles, street signs, bus stops, water meters, electrical boxes? Is there essentially anything else within the road reserve, so within the property, between the property boundary and the curb, that could restrict the future access opportunities? So like I said, the options for you in terms of driveway locations and all that sort of stuff. Because you'd hate to say, hey, I'll plan to put a carport on in this instance, the left-hand side of the property, and then you find out you got a street tree, you got a power pole, you got all this fun stuff to try and navigate around. It's just not going to happen. Okay, now we can go back down to where we were. Urban footprint. Okay, so this is essentially, it shows what the state government's rules say. So if you're in the pink, it basically says, as far as state government's concerned, you're allowed to do development, so you're allowed to do future work. If you'd been in the green, then that would be an indicator that they are extremely restricted in terms of subdivision potential, development potential, all of that sort of stuff. Then we come down, referral triggers. You've got no referral mapping there, which is great. So the referral mapping shows things like if you're within 25 metres of a state-controlled road. That's relevant because you can expect over time we're going to get more and more vehicles on the road. More and more vehicles equals more noise. So if you're positioned close to a main road like that and you're sort of identified in the mapping, that might be an alarm bell to go, oh, are you ready to accept, or can you live with that increased noise levels in the future? Then we come down, there's no easements in sight, which is beautiful. Oh, and there's Charlie's little face again. So what I'm taking, long story short, is we are in character residential heartland. So that means cute houses surrounded by other cute houses. Council's going to restrict the amount of demolition work that people can do, and they're going to control the look of the additions and extensions into the future. So if you're not wanting to do any development options, if you're wanting to be surrounded by beautiful old character homes on bigger blocks, this is exactly what you want to aim for. The other things I'm noticing is what we've established. Pre-1947 house, you're going to be limited in terms of the amount of demolition work you can do. I'm noticing in terms of overlays, we don't have any of the problematic ones like the biodiversity overlay, the flooding overlay, if basically anything that's going to cause you grief. There's no bushfire hazard overlay, which can add significant costs. There's no industrial amenity overlay, which suggests to you might be subject to noise or odour impacts in the future. There's no, it's just looking beautiful. It's such a clean site from a town planning perspective, which is super, super rare these days. It is so hard to find a site that doesn't have problems on it. We're always dealing with flooding or some sort of protection that's a nightmare for people in terms of renovations, extensions, developments, all that sort of stuff. So overall, I think it's a great site if you're looking to do if you basically want a beautiful family home. Now, actually, that's something else I can comment on. Looking at the front facade, you can obviously see, and you pick this up through the real estate ad, it's been heavily modified, but it's just cosmetic renovations. So people might actually look at that house and go, it's been butchered. Yeah, no, you just take that rendering off the front there, you reinstate that front veranda, you take off some of the cladding or the FC sheeting or whatever's been put over the walls inside, and all of a sudden you would have a beautiful old girl that would just be ripe for renovation. So I think that's probably all I want to talk about today. Hopefully that's giving you some insight into what goes through my mind when I actually look at a site, analysing it. Actually, that's something I might say, what I would do from here. Personally, if I was looking at this property, number one, I would bring up a dial before you dig search. So I'd basically do the dial before you dig search to work out where the sewer and water lines go. You want to make sure that none of those lines are going under your house or in weird locations. Or if they are going in those locations, you want to make sure you understand the implications of having them in those locations. So when I bought my property recently, it has a stormwater line that runs straight through the underneath of the house. Yeah, obviously not desirable. You prefer not to have any pipework running under your house. But in the scheme of things, I went to an engineer, had a chat to him. They said, yep, what it means is when you come to renovate, you're going to have to raise the house up an extra 15 centimetres to account for that pipework. And you're also going to have to budget maybe another 15 grand in terms of extra post piers, all of that sort of stuff. So for me, it was, like I said, ideal world, you wouldn't have any pipework. But worst case scenario, I've just got to budget another 15 grand. I've just got to be able to go up that a little bit higher. It's not a deal breaker for me. I can account for that sort of stuff. But that's what you want to look into from the very beginning. Given that it is such a big block, I would be very surprised if the pipework did run under the house. The property I bought was very, very tiny. The pipes had nowhere else to go but under the house. But yes, it's always worth double checking that and running it past an engineer just to make sure there's no surprises there. The other thing is I would always do a building approval search. So I'd basically be checking to see that everything on the property is approved, or if not, that you're prepared to live with that unlawful work. Again, looking at this property, it doesn't look like it's been touched a heck of a lot. Again, yes, okay, cosmetically it has had a bit of work going on, but there hasn't been any major additions. Again, the property I bought, it had 2 bathrooms, a back veranda, all of this stuff added on. So when I first turned up, my alarm bells were ringing. I was thinking, oh, okay, there's all this extra work that's been added on. I wonder if it's actually been approved. I should probably look into that. Turned out it was all lawful. It all had actually been approved. But again, it was something that I just wanted to look into. If you want to know more about why that's important, we did a video about a month and a half ago, I think it was, where I talked about the actual risks of not getting approval and all that sort of stuff. So go check out that. I think that probably covers everything. Yeah. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and if you have any questions, I'd encourage you to add them in the comment section below. Until next time, thanks for watching.
For all you red tape lovers out there, I have one thing to say. Well, no, actually, I've got 3. Number 1, the advice provided in these videos is general in nature. It's not site-specific. You would be a silly Billy to go and make financial decisions based on this advice without first checking with the town planner. Don't be a silly Billy. Number 2, Brisbane Town Planning is in no way linked to Brisbane City Council. The views expressed in these videos are my own, not council's. So if you don't like them, blame me, not council. Number 3, what was my number 3? Oh yeah, the views expressed in these videos are accurate at the time of recording. If you're watching this video back 10 years from now, the views may not be so accurate. That's all.